All right, welcome to Crossfire Republic, where we got controversial topics in the crosshairs. All right, I'm your host, Cujo. With me, as usual, Casey. What's up, Casey? How you doing?
Glad to
be here, brother.
All right, yeah, dude. And without further ado, enough of the pleasantries. Let's go ahead and get into the topics of the day, which we're going to be talking about UFC Freedom 250 on the White House lawn, a battle of warriors, patriotism, America. And then we're going to get into a discussion about the Iran war and thoughts on that. But first, before we get into anything deep, you know what we got to do? We got to load up with a dippy dap for our lippy lap. Shout out to Skilly Goat Gilton and the Panjaway Bastards. All right, we're locked and loaded, baby. Let's go ahead and get into it. So yeah, the White House, the fights at the White House, bro. What are your initial takeaways?
Well, it was such an amazing event. Just from I really appreciated the fact that the military was so involved in it.
Yeah.
It just felt so patriotic, a throwback. That is something straight out of the 80s.
Bro, that's thinking, dude. And it ties into our last conversation that we had here. Like the 80s and patriotism. America was kicking ass, taking names. We had Hulk Hogan doing his thing. And speaking of Hulk Hogan, there's basically a reincarnation of the guy at UFC. I think his name was Hokit. This Hokit guy was a spitting image of the 80s, bro. Give me that back.
Yeah. So I'm a big fan, and I've been watching nonstop. Really since we were in the army and we got out, and so Josh Hokit, he kind of reminds me a lot of like the Macho Man.
Macho Man, yeah, buddy.
Yeah. He dresses like him. He always wears some crazy skull cap, and he's got the glasses going or a boonie. And he does the voice thing like Macho Man did too. Not the same exact voice. He's got his own style on it. That's what he's doing too. He calls himself the Incredible Hulk. He's just what an entertainer he is. He knows he's there to generate controversy and get attention. And he's been very successful at it.
Oh, bro, it's my kind of guy. And during the fight, they were throwing through the feeds on, I think it was Twitter, the comments on Twitter, and I started to realize, holy shit, most people don't even like this guy. Everybody's talking crap. And I think it's that persona that he takes on, that Macho Man Randy Savage, and he just leans into the character. And anyway, Hokit was the man. He was my favorite character out there.
Total heel. And he tries to be the villain. And when I was watching his fight against Derrick Lewis, he was clearly dominating that entire fight from beginning to end. But at one point, he's got him in an arm bar. And instead of finishing him, he just looks up at the camera, makes eye contact with America, and screams for like 10 seconds as loud as he could, instead of finishing Derrick Lewis off right then and then. A total heel, a total villain, and I think that's awesome.
I feed into it like I love that. Man, the showboating's one thing when you can't back it up, but this guy can back it up. I was surprised at how quick, like for a big dude, like he's not like Derrick Lewis, you know what I mean? But he's a bigger dude. But to see how athletic he was, while not being like so lean, how he could move, his endurance, he was impressive. So not only is he the shit talker heel, which I just love because he can back it up. And when you can back it up, that's when it becomes fun. And that armbar thing, bro, I'm like, what is he doing? And then it became clear to me, like, he's not worried 1 second about this guy. He just wants to taunt and showboat, and I'm here for it, bro. That was probably my favorite fight of the night, actually.
A great performance by him. Totally a throwback to that 80s, 90s era that we love, that our generation grew up with.
What song did he come out to? He came out to
A Real American.
I'm a Real American. Yeah.
Walkout song.
Bro, I mean, do they even make music like that? Anytime that I hear America in any modern day music, it's just roasting America and how terrible it is. But back then, man, every song was just riddled with American patriotism and pride, bro. We need to get back to the 80s. That's when America was America, you know?
It's that culture that a lot of us who grew up in that era miss. If you remember back then, the left and the right weren't fighting over like hardly anything back then. Back then, they were basically on the same page, except they differed in how much we were going to get taxed, basically.
Yeah, which is a story old as time, right? Between those two ideologies.
But we all agreed America was the best, and we loved America for it. And I'd like to get back to a place where the left and the right are fighting over tax percentages and less about whether America's the best or not.
But one of the things that I think really brought that patriotism, like that UFC fight was not just about the UFC fight. This was far beyond it. Every commercial, it was geared to telling the story of America and how we came to be from struggling to the most dominant nation that's ever existed. And from start to end, every piece of it, just like, there were commercials that made my hair stand up. You know what I mean? I got the chills like, man, America is just, it's the greatest, bro. And we should be proud of how we built it up to what it is. Because, I mean, the covered wagon commercial or advertisement, like, just think about this. These people had nothing and they're like willing to risk it all, going out into the unknown, no roads, no modern equipment, no AC, no heat, right? And they don't know what's ahead of them. They have no idea what's going to be out there. And so they're going into it blind, knowing that the percentage of survival is not high.
And there was wars with the Indians while they were doing it too.
Yep. So there was threats from basically everything. And they took the risk and built this up. And here we have this nation. And we owe so much to our ancestors for going out and taking the risk and allowing us to thrive in the society that for some reason we've lost pride in. Where did it go?
And in a lot of ways, you know, I'm a martial artist. I'm a blue belt, so I always brag about it.
Oh, hell yeah.
But, you know, I think in a lot of ways, UFC and MMA, boxing, any combat sport is really, in a lot of ways, a microcosm for life. You know, it was our ancestors that came to this country that were brave. They were warriors. They were courageous. They were responsible. They were industrious. They were smart risk takers. And that's what every one of those fighters on that UFC card was as well. You know, even the ones who lost, every single fight was phenomenal. Even the guys, I know every fight ended in a knockout, but not a single one of those people who lost their fight looked like they didn't deserve to be there, and they worked their butt off. And I think every single one, even the losers, gave an amazing performance that showed a lot of grit, toughness, and a performance that they should all be proud of.
Bro, that it really was a giant metaphor. Like, the whole thing was incredible. Again, like, how often one of the things that used to drive me nuts when I was consuming a lot of the UFC was how many fights were like, what the hell? What did we even just watch? Like, why is this? And it was a high percentage of it. So I think that, like, the balls of Donald Trump to put this thing together.
Can I jump back in? Yeah, I think in the lead up to the event, there was a lot of controversy. And let's be honest, that controversy is coming from America's left. And they were saying that this is Donald Trump's spectacle. It's all about Donald Trump because of his birthday, and that it was a partisan right-wing event. But when I actually watched it, there was not a single MAGA hat to be found there. I didn't see anything that was like Republican. All I saw were American colors, veterans, and or active duty military, and almost every single scene except for the actual fight when that was going on. And yes, Donald Trump was there, but he was just sitting there. He didn't give any speeches.
No,
He wasn't. He was just wearing a regular white USA hat, not a MAGA hat. So I thought it was a completely nonpartisan event that was meant to be unifying. And I think Donald Trump deserves a lot of credit for that. He could have, Donald Trump can do whatever he wants to do for a lot of things in this world. And he could have turned it into a MAGA event. He could have turned it into a right-wing event. He didn't do that. He was trying to make it unifying. I thought the UFC did a great job of trying to make it unifying. And then I think in a lot of ways it accomplished the mission. I think it changed a lot of people's ideas about the UFC fighting, whether it's acceptable to have patriotic events like this again in America, mainstreamed again. So I think those are all good things, despite the criticism that came afterwards. I guess if I was going to be critical of one thing, it would be Josh Hokit. I thought his performance was amazing, and his actions against Derrick Lewis spoke for themselves about his greatness as a fighter, especially as a wrestler. He's a former All-American D1 wrestler. He was a two-sport athlete in college. He played in the NFL for the 49ers as a fullback before he went to the UFC. I think he's got an amazing story, and his performance in every fight I've ever seen from him speaks for itself. I think he took away from that when he decided to degrade Michelle Obama. And, I'm all for free speech and everything. But at the end of the day, I think some people on the right shoot themselves in the foot by just trying to own people, to own the other side. And the question I ask is, does that take away from the greatness of the ideas that the right wing is trying to spread, right? At the end of the day, Josh Hokit's message, it's not about Michelle Obama. It's not about, the crazy lefties. What it's about is a kid that grew up in America, was a two-sport athlete. As soon as football season was over, he'd start grinding for the wrestling team, immediately have to cut 30 pounds. He was a walk-on, undrafted free agent to the NFL, was on the practice squad for, I believe, 3 years before he worked himself onto the roster. And then he comes to the UFC and he dominates in spectacular fashion by being courageous, staying in the pocket, relentless, always prepared, never runs out of cardio. And I think that's the greatness in the message of Josh Hokit. And unfortunately, I think his comments get away from how great strength is to a movement, to a person, to a society for a sense of accomplishment. And it kind of put the focus on just owning the other side.
Yeah, that's a lot of good points. I agree. There's a certain brilliance in being able to make a statement physically without words and just letting that speak for itself without having to take additional shots. And I think that sort of thing actually does more damage to the movement and trying to get people to understand balance and patriotism in America when you're taking shots at people that we're in charge of America, right? And so it did take away, and it's unfortunate because it's another missed opportunity, kind of like the January 6th thing, right? That was an opportunity for us to show that we can have our voices heard without escalating any sort of violence. And so those mistakes of emotion that people react on do a lot of damage in trying to get what they want accomplished. And to go up there and make the statement he made and all the showboating and the thanking of Trump and all that, brilliant. But end it before you start trying to own them, as you said.
Just in general, it's a lack of class, right?
Simply put, a lack of class. Yes. And let me back it up a little bit more too, and talk about the Donald Trump aspect of it, because you're right. And when when he came out there, when this was going on, the build up, all of it, like, dude, as it kept getting closer, bro, I felt that pride and I was just getting more and more excited and like, oh man, America, you know what I'm saying? Like that whole thing. And as it's building up, and I honestly, I wanted Donald Trump to give a few words of like, America, fuck yeah, or something, you know? And the fact that he didn't, and he did not want to make a spectacle of himself in this moment because it wasn't about him. It was about America. And I think another thing that points to that, one thing that I noticed is after I believe Hokit gave him his a chain or whatever, it was Dana White sitting next to him, I believe, and reached in to like look at it and admire it, like, whoa. And Donald Trump thought for a second, and then he's like, no, hey, pay attention. This man's giving a speech, right? Like the focus should be on him. Pay attention to Hokit, because at that time he was giving his post conference or his post fight speech. And I thought that was another moment where he's like, hey, pay attention, like put your focus on the true people who need to be focused on, which are the competitors out there, giving it their all. And one thing else I wanted to mention is, even though there were fighters from different nations there, I think it elevated the performance of every single fighter. The magnitude of this event and what it meant to people in terms of visibility and uniqueness elevated everybody. Everybody wanted to win. And one of the fights, dude was owning him. The guy was owning him, and all it took is him to come back, and he got the shot, knocked him. I think it was a TK.
Diego Lopez fight.
Diego Lopez fight. Thank you. Yeah, and I thought that was incredible because I was like, oh, we got this in the bag. And he just kept fighting and fighting, and every single one of these competitors never gave up. Like, no matter exhausted. There was, and you got to help me with the names. The one dude who they wanted to call the fight, and he's like, no, throw me out there.
Oh, Taporia. Yeah.
Taporia, thank you. I think that just all these competitors, like you said, they all deserve to be out there and they all fought to the very end. And that is the true American spirit, right? Like, no matter how bad things get, we never give up. We never accept defeat. We never quit, right? And I think every one of those athletes, regardless of the nation they were from, really showed that mentality. And that's America, and everybody should appreciate that. It's just warrior mentality, and it was a beautiful thing to see.
It was another thing is in a lot of ways our culture has become so feminized. It was a nice dose of healthy masculine testosterone back into the culture, and I gotta say it felt good to feel a part of it.
100%. It was just, people look on these violent sports and like, there's the movement in the NFL with head injuries or whatever. And Tua is like a big proponent of like, yo, I'm out here trying to give it my all. Like, I'm not worried about the consequences. And there's something to be appreciated and respected about this. And to be able to show like this violence, but what beauty comes from it. Like, these people are giving it their all, and they're literally making physical sacrifices to accomplish their goal and to entertain us. And it was good violence, good classic, beautiful violence, not violence out on the street where you got 4 people beating the crap out of some old man in a sports car. I just seen this video, crazy. But it's good violence that's agreed upon with 2 parties. And, once the line is done, once it's over, right? And then there's no attacking when they're unguarded and stuff like that. And that's beautiful. And it was good to see good violence again. Like I said, real quick, I've been out of UFC for some time, mainly because all my favorites, Mirko Cro Cop, shout out to Mirko Cro Cop, my favorite all time. All of the people I grew up watching all faded away, and you become attached to them. And so it was hard for me to get invested in any of these new characters. But this event, because it was an American event, I tuned in. If it was a normal UFC event, I'm not watching it. But at the White House, I'm like, oh, this is going to be badass. And it restored my view of the UFC as a consumer, and realized like there are characters out there that are entertaining. The fights are really good still. And I thank Donald Trump and Dana White for drawing me back in. I'm officially back in on UFC. Tremendous event.
I think a couple things I want to hit on. Before I forget, the fight with Sean O'Malley, where he was fighting Zahibi, and as he knocked him out, Zahibi is falling down semi-conscious, and you look over and Sean O'Malley is saluting. How did he have the speed, timing, presence of mind to put that together? And I want that as a picture with the American flag in the backdrop on my wall.
That's it, bro. We got to get giant murals posted on the wall. That was as American as it gets, baby. The arrogance, the speed, like this dude was playing chess, like Bill Belichick says, he's playing chess. Everybody else is playing checkers. And it showed throughout the fight. He's got such quick hands, and he's able to hold power behind them. And he's so skilled. His reaction time is incredible. I was real impressed by the kid.
Yeah, he's awesome. I hope you start watching the UFC regularly. They do fights almost every Saturday. It's on Paramount Plus now.
Quick plug to Paramount Plus.
I kind of feel like I'm selling crow's milk here.
Fight milk made with real crows.
but and honestly, me and you used to watch all the fights together in the DFACT on the Army News Channel, and I got to tell you, the fights nowadays are so much better than back then. I love those guys. You know, Crow Cop, Frank Mir, even Brock Lesnar. But the guys nowadays are just light years ahead of where the fighters were back then. And it's a lot more entertaining because of it.
All right. Well, I'm sold. You don't have to sell me on anymore. I'm going to watch as many as I can when I get time. And of course, we'll be able to discuss them on here. There's probably lots of nuance and interpersonal relationships between these fighters, plus the fights themselves. We can analyze all that. Crossfire Republic. Don't forget, subscribe, share, like, whatever else exists. So this was really a victory for Trump and America. I think it was a successful turnout. Just tremendous respect for the Medal of Honor recipients that walked out with each of these fighters. What an incredible honor. These are men who they make movies about. These are war heroes that were out there sacrificing their all to keep our borders safe, to keep Americans safe. And these are real life heroes that they like make movies about out there. Getting recognized. And without these people, without our warriors on the front line, we witnessed all sorts of acts of heroics during our times deployed. And that needs to be appreciated and recognized in America. And I think they did a great job at doing that during the fights. And that was one of my favorite things.
But one thing I want to say, Cujo, is you know, one of the biggest issues we have in this country when it comes to our cultural cohesiveness as a nation is there's a large, I guess, dichotomy in the sense that only 1% or less than 1% of our nation serves in the military, and 99% don't. Of that 1% that serves, about a third of our forces are constantly stationed overseas, or they're out deployed or out on mission abroad. So the interaction that the average American has with the military, especially millennials and younger, as there hasn't been any drafts instituted, is minimal. And just to be frank, most of America knows very little about our military, very little about our veterans. So I think one way that you solve that, if you don't want to have a national draft or conscription, is you highlight the ones who are serving. You bring them alive to the American public, and you do that through media. And that starts to create that cohesive cultural story, if you will. And so I thought the UFC and by highlighting and making the service members such a huge part of it, that helps to kind of bridge that gap. And I know it was only one event. What I'm hopeful for, though, is that one event leads to multiple events, and not just with fighting, but UFC should totally do something every year.
Right.
But with other events that are unifying, nonpartisan, and that can help to rebuild this culture that we have that is decayed and fractured over the last couple decades.
Bro, that's a good point, man. And I mean, when we were kids, we were bombarded with these military commercials or whatever. That's one of the reasons that I joined, among many reasons, as there is with everybody, right? Is that it gave me a sense of pride in my nation and my moral obligation that lives within inside me, that I need to sacrifice for my nation, to show how much I care and I love it. And you're right, dude. We should be implementing more of this. I know that at a lot of sporting events, they bring out and recognize military personnel, but it needs to move beyond that demographic. It needs to move into all areas of our nation, because if people respected and admired military more, I think we would have less pushback on things like ICE. I think we would have less pushback on when we need to go to war, like with Iran, and we would gain more support, because at the end of the day, like, we're not just out there starting wars with Iran for no good reason, right? With that, like, we got Donald Trump's treaty signed and going. We're already starting to see the impacts with oil on the fuel pumps with energy. I think the price per barrel has decreased. I think it's under $100 a barrel now.
Yeah, they said the lowest price per barrel in 4 months, and it's only expected to keep going down as supplies start increasing again.
Which makes sense. There's nothing complicated about it, right? Prices went up because the shipment had been disrupted. The pipeline.
20% of the global oil supply passed through the Strait of Hormuz.
Right. And so this is shut down. So of course that's going to put strain on our energy, and it's going to force us to have higher prices at the pump. But it's still, the nation average only peaked at $4.50 a gallon. And I'd like to point out that during the Ukraine invasion, during the Biden administration, fuel prices national average reached just over $5 a gallon. And I know that a lot of the pushback from the left is that, oh, gas prices, but I don't remember them pushing back under the Biden administration when actually it was worse. And as a matter of fact, price per barrel reached $123 per barrel under that time in the Biden administration, and only reached $120 during this Iran conflict. And if we're going to be consistent, we must condemn everybody according to the same moral structure. And so was that sacrifice worth it? That's what becomes the question. Of course, I believe it was, on many different levels, from national security to economic power and control over the global economy.
Yeah, I think one thing that's interesting is, even though gas prices went up significantly, it was a strain on the entire economy. It was a much larger strain, though, globally. And why is that? And that's because Trump put America in the position to be the world's largest exporter of crude oil, which we are now. And so leading up to the war, he, seized the Venezuelan oil supply. So that catapulted us to the largest exporter after that point. Before the war, he renamed the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. He's ordered the destruction of all the narco trafficking boats that were going to and around. He blockaded Cuba. So it's hard to understand this at the time, but it sounds like now, like he did a lot of moves ahead of time.
3D checks.
Yeah, to ensure that the pressure we felt from the closure of Strait of Hormuz, which I'm thinking now he predicted well ahead of time. He did a lot of moves before that occurred to ensure that we wouldn't feel it as hard as other nations like Japan, where prices got over $10 per gallon. England, where they got over $10 a gallon. Germany, where they're over $8 a gallon. So I think he did a lot of moves ahead of time that the public didn't put together, but now it kind of makes sense.
The Venezuelan thing makes perfect sense now. And I think a lot of times the people that you see that are adamantly against this are people who can't see the forest through the trees. And if they would just be patient and zoom out, maybe this guy has a plan. Maybe he's not incompetent like people draw him to be. Maybe he's actually, pretty smart. Is he offensive as a person? I don't care for some of the remarks, but sometimes it's needed to make a point. I think that there's probably a better approach to that, but no matter what the approach is, he's going to get criticized in some fashion or another. So why bother, I guess, concealing it? But he's wicked smart, in this conflict in Iran, the position it gives us globally through oil is impressive, and the Venezuela thing makes perfect sense. It helped minimize the damage that we took, and of course he won't get credit for that piece, I'm sure.
Yeah, I doubt he'll get any credit at all. I think what's interesting about the Iran war is it's been so controversial. There's the left seems to be completely against it from day one. They see it in many respects as an imperialist mission that is only supporting the state of Israel. And there's been a loud contingent of the right and basically all of the libertarians that virtually see it the exact same way.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder, why is that? So you're talking about the pushback from more right-leaning people as well?
Yeah, well, I feel like this Iran war has been very controversial with, I would say, probably, I think the polls show around 60% of Americans. And the thought leaders of the woke right and the libertarian movement, which are separate movements, and the left in general has been highly critical of the war, framing it as if this is only an imperialist expedition that only benefits Israel. And, I think that's the mainstream narrative that's been pushed, certainly on the left. I think Fox News is not pushing that, but they're, the BoomerCon news network, basically. And I think what that's done is a huge disservice to the American public, because this war was for the primary beneficiaries of this war are Americans, poor Americans, and middle-class Americans. And I think I've got great arguments to support those. And unfortunately, that's not the message that's getting put out there.
So the narrative on the right's kind of being pushed as anti-Iran as well. Like you said, 60% of people are against this. Do you think that, because the only thing that reason I could suspect that someone on the right would be against the Iran war is because they're pot committed to the no new wars thing and they don't want to seem like hypocrites. Do you think that that's a fair statement?
I do think that's a fair statement for some of them. And I would say that is the primary reason for libertarians is libertarians are very anti-interventionist, very anti-war, and they don't want to get involved. They see this as another forever war, an endless campaign in the Middle East that they believe is unwinnable. They believe that we lost the war in Iraq. They believe that our military lost the war in Afghanistan. I think those things are the popular consensus pushed by the mainstream media and academia. However, I think data shows that nothing is farther from the truth. But the libertarian reason is that they are anti-interventionist, and that is a value that they hold as part of their movement that is timeless, and they stand by it, and it's their principles. And you got to respect people that stand by their principles unchanging. And the thing I'll say about the libertarians is they're as much against the Iran war as they were against what we did in Venezuela, what we did in Iraq, what we did in Libya, and they're against all of it.
Yeah.
Part of the reason why the average American is against this war is because they don't understand how the economy functions. And that's a huge problem. Our media is not talking about that at all. Schools are hardly talking about it at all. Unless you've independently read Thomas Sowell, how would you know about the gold standard and the petrodollar?
No, yeah. To be honest, I don't know a lot about gold standard, except for that the idea is that you back your currency based on the amount of gold in which you have, right? So you're limited to the amount, to what is that you have to back it, which is the gold standard. And I think that that's why the transition into the petrodollar is actually important, because it allows for us to have more quantity and more flexibility to control basically our own economy. If I'm right, you're the economic expert.
Well, I'm not an economic expert by any means. I'm just
comparatively.
Yeah, I'm just a regular American, rock, flag, and eagle.
Rock, flag, and eagle. That's it.
But really, when America was on the gold standard, and this is one of the libertarian arguments, they want to return to the gold standard or go to the Bitcoin standard. And that's because you can't really manipulate the market on gold, right? There's a finite amount of it. There's only so much gold on the planet, and that gold is an accurate representation of wealth. But what is currency in general? Currency in general is nothing more than a representation of a person's labor. And in exchange for their labor, they take in currency. In exchange for that currency, they're essentially giving their labor to another person. But in a complex supply chain, the currency method works best because we understand how a farmer generates revenue. They, plant their seeds, and at the end of the growing season, they harvest their crops, and then they bring them to market and sell them. Totally makes sense. But how does an HR middle manager generate revenue? It's a lot harder to see, right?
Right.
They perform their labor. They're paid by their employer, and they go out and spend that currency in the market, at the grocery store or whatever. And that's how the cycle works. But when you're using gold, it's very limited on what you can use for investment, what you can use for innovations, because there's only a finite amount of it, and your currency is strictly limited to that. If you dilute the gold, then you run into the inflation problems of Rome, and you lead into the famous inflation problems that we saw in the Weimar Republic in Germany, but before the Nazis took over. Yep. So what the petrodollar system allows us to do is it allows us to manipulate our own currency without having the risk of massive inflation cycles like we've seen in Rome and Germany, just to name two of the most prominent examples. And what does that do? When you have an artificially built floor like that economically, that allows you to invest more as a country into innovations, into technologies, really into entitlements. But we're getting a little bit a little bit too far ahead of ourselves. Can I circle back kind of like to the origins of the petrodollar system?
Yes. Let's go.
Yeah. So basically in 1974, take yourself back to that time period. We have the 70s gas crisis. We believe that there's a finite amount of oil. We are globally mass industrializing. Like America was already industrialized completely by then, where Japan is becoming completely industrialized by 74. Germany, all of Western Europe is industrialized. And now that's starting to happen in Africa, in the Middle East, and especially China's about to start industrializing en masse across the entire country as well at this time period. So now, and also put yourself back in 1974, fracking has not been invented. Fracking was invented until the 2010s, or just before the 2010s, I'm sorry, in America. That was out in southwestern United States that they invented fracking. That's how new and how recent it is. So in 1974, we think that the greatest commodity that a country can own is oil for energy. Your entire economy runs on that energy. All of your institutions run on that energy. There's a limited supply of it, so it works like gold, but there's a much greater supply than gold, where there's millions of barrels a day. So what we decided to do was, being the world's strongest military power at the time, with the greatest economy, with the greatest engineers, with the greatest banking system, with the greatest colleges, universities, producing the most educated people in human history at that point in time that had ever been produced in a country. We decided to leverage those skills and those resources with Saudi Arabia, the largest oil producer at the time. And that's when we entered into the agreement with Saudi Arabia and later OPEC that they would trade for all of their oil with all foreign countries only in US dollars. And that means that when Japan wants to buy oil from Saudi Arabia in 74, they have to sell their yen to buy American dollars and then buy their oil. And then Saudi Arabia takes those American dollars and they recycle what's now called the petrodollar back into the American economy by buying stocks, and by buying bonds, United States bonds and treasuries. So that money is American dollars that we're forcing other countries to have to buy, selling their currency, sometimes at a loss, to buy the American dollars. And then Saudi Arabia pumps that money back into her economy. Not just Saudi Arabia, the entire Gulf 6 countries. But I'm just using them because they're the largest example. And so what that does is it makes it so that our currency, we can suffer some inflation like we did during the Biden years, but that's relatively nothing compared to the inflation that was felt in Japan in the 1980s when they had to sell their currency at a massive loss just to buy oil to keep their economy moving, right?
Yeah. So that's plainly put, this is a system that gives ultimate power and control over the economy and puts us at a advantage over other nations, which people don't want to admit, but there are enemies of Americans out there that exist, and we need to put ourselves in a position where we're making the decisions rather than them, because their decisions are not in the best interest of America and American people. And so energy is much more important than a material, which is basically what gold is, right? Is a material. Energy is everything when it comes to life and civilization. So to be able to leverage that to back our currency on is a sound idea, and it would be irresponsible to transition that power to something that doesn't give us that leverage over other nations, which I think you're seeing try to be done with the green movement and all this renewable energy. I think it would be
it would be terrible for America and our position globally to transition to all those as an energy source.
Well, not only would it be terrible, but it's not what the people want, right? So when you look at the polls are very clear on this. 77% of registered Republicans oppose reducing Social Security benefits, right? 83% of registered Democrats oppose reducing Social Security benefits. I'm not 100% sure about this poll, but I believe I saw a poll that said that 60% of Americans were against reducing food stamp benefits. So when you look at all these entitlement programs and how much the social welfare programs have grown in the United States, and then let's just look at big picture. What does everybody want from their government for the most part? Most people want less taxes and they want more social, a higher safety social net for people, more entitlements, more benefits. Well, how do you get more benefits while having less taxes at the same time? The only way you can do that is if you have a recycled American petrodollar that leaves your country and then is guaranteed to come back in. And that's the only way that you really run. And it's not just as simple as people might say, well, it's just the poor people that are getting the Section 8 housing, or it's just the poor people that are getting food stamps. It's just the poor people that are getting welfare benefits. They're not providing anything to the economy. Well, what about the millions of the middle class and upper middle class in this country that are getting federally subsidized student loans to go to get their bachelor's degree and higher degrees afterwards? Or what about the millions of, poor Americans that are trying to find social mobility and they're getting Pell Grants, right? I mean, those are massive entitlements that people aren't even putting into the picture here. What about Freddie and Fannie Mac and First Time Homeowners Association, right? What about, Americans overwhelmingly support those programs. You're only allowed to have those programs, especially all the ones that involve federally subsidized student loans or federally subsidized mortgages. You're only getting those amazing interest rates, and some of them aren't even that amazing. I mean, we're talking over 10% for some of them, but those interest rates would be so much more expensive that they would be unaffordable for most Americans without the petrodollar system. If we were tied to a gold currency, if we were tied to a gold-backed currency, every time we conducted a purchase with a foreign nation, that gold literally leaves our banks and never comes back. It stays in that foreign nation until they buy something from us. We don't produce hardly anything anymore outside of, munitions. And, I guess we export a lot of entertainment, but we're not really the largest exporter anymore in manufacturing goods. So it'd be impossible to have all these benefits, all these opportunities for social welfare social mobility, without the petrodollar system to artificially ensure that the ceiling the floor is never too low, to ensure that inflation never gets too high, to ensure that interest rates remain artificially low for Americans in a way that they simply don't in Europe.
Wow. Yeah, dude, that's a good point. And I've never actually thought about that. But all of the social programs essentially are affordable and we're able to get those out to the poor and middle class who contribute the most to society due to the petrodollar. So I guess that makes the Iran conflict pretty important in securing our ability to make those controls and to bring revenue back into the country so that it can be reinvested into the community. So I think
But that's not to say it's a perfect system. There are trade-offs, right? And some of those trade-offs are, number one, that we have to have the largest military in the world so that we can police all of the global shipping lanes like we do.
Well, that's part of the agreement with the petrodollar, right? America offers security on the it's like an insurance for the shipping.
We are responsible for 90% of global shipping lanes, and that's because of the petrodollar system. We are also responsible for 90% of all fiber optic cables.
Oh, okay, which is huge.
Yeah, that go under the ground on the ocean. That's our Navy's responsibility. Also, that drags us into wars like the war in Kuwait against Iraq, the Gulf War. That drags us as being the military for Saudi Arabia de facto. They do have their own small military, but they know that if anything ever happened, it would be us. That means that we ally with the United Arab Emirates, who I would argue is one of our best allies over the last 30 years. But nevertheless, we're responsible for a lot of their defense. We're responsible. We're not responsible, but we have an American interest in defending Israel because of the Suez Canal and the Mediterranean that's on their side. We are responsible for those fiber optics and those shipping lanes. It makes sense for us to have a strategic partnership with them because of that. One of the reasons. There's a lot more for Israel, but that's one of them. So there are trade-offs, right? When we feel like, a dictator in Libya wants to get off the petrodollar system and is trying to organize a rebellion during the Arab Spring to get more people to follow his ways, that's in direct conflict with not just us, but also our Gulf 6 partners as well. So there's pressure on us to do what we did and take him out. There's when Saddam Hussein starts, acting, out of accordance with our strategic goals. Well, now there's pressure, and more increased pressure to go over there and take him out, and then afterwards modernize their country. So there are trade-offs here. I think, in my opinion, the trade-offs are well worth it, and we're gaining a massive advantage from this that only 1% of the population has to sacrifice, while the other 99% largely benefits free and clear from.
Yeah, holy crap, that's a good point. The 1%, you put it in perspective, 1% of the nation, and not every one of that 1% of the nation is making any sort of sacrifice with this conflict, and the majority of us get a benefit, which of course is why it's so important to care about our soldiers and patriotism in America, because they are going out and making the ultimate sacrifice in certain cases to protect us and to keep our nation safe. And, looking at it from just beyond the benefits to America, like, we have an obligation and duty to protect those and those other nations' economies as well, and that gets overlooked. So it's not like it's all out of our best interest, that the reasons we're doing this, and which oftentimes brings us into war. But again, the ability to be able to have social programs and to be able to control our inflation, while also putting us in a position of leverage and power over our enemy nations, all that combined, makes the Iran conflict and how we went into this and what we accomplished of it hugely important and a big dub for America. And whether right, left, or anywhere in between, we should always celebrate our wins, because that's what brings us together ultimately, and that's what needs to happen in America. 80s America, bring America's 80s America back.
All right, I gotta throw in a fresh zin.
I was just about to say, it's that time. Crossfire Republic, everybody, throw in your zins, a dippy dap for the lippy lap. Shout out to Skilly
and Panchway's bastards. I think it's important, Cujo, though, in the framing of this war, we gotta look to really understand how much of a massive victory this is for the majority of America, and middle America and middle class America. I think we got to talk about the pre-war context.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's dive into that.
So for the last 30 years, it was basically popular consensus that America was going to lose its power as the #1 world hegemon, and that it was going to become a multipolar world with China and Russia leveraging their influence and their geographical spheres, meaning that we were just going to have less control economically, militarily, and I guess less control over global popular consensus, if you will. Right. And so the popular consensus was that China and Russia were going to ascend. And the year for that was 2027. In 2010, China became, in the beginning of President Obama's presidency, China became the world's largest economy. At the same time, they became the world's largest importer of oil. This was something we really didn't talk about when we talked about the history of the petrodollar system. But at the time, it's important to remember when that deal was signed with Saudi Arabia, America was the world's largest importer of oil, which gave Saudi Arabia a huge incentive to sign on to that agreement.
Right.
So fast forward to 2010, China becomes the world's largest importer at this point. Then we have the BRICS nations set up. Who are the BRICS nations? Well, that's Brazil, you have Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And they decide that they are going to start trading for oil with Iran and some other countries in yen, or I'm sorry, in the Chinese yuan and in rubles. So right now you're taking some of these world's biggest economies and you're moving them, they're moving themselves off of the American dollar, which and into their own currencies, which strengthens their currency and weakens the American dollar. And this has been really happening since the 2010s, early 2010s, that this occurred right here. Then you fast forward to 2021 and the 50-year agreement with Saudi Arabia for them to only trade their oil exports in American dollars ends. And they say they're going to start trading in other currencies at that point. Another reason why we saw so much inflation during the Biden years. So now we have a position where many economists, many American elites, especially on the left, some on the right, they see Thucydides' trap happening. And what is Thucydides' trap? Well, that takes us back to ancient Greece and the war between the first war between Greece and Persia, Athens and Sparta specifically. And the theory goes that when there's a well-established power and there is a rival rising power, that eventually those two countries will lead to war. And it's happened countless times. You can look at Persia and Greece as the big example right there. You can look at the German Empire and Great Britain. You can look at the German Empire and Austria. It happens. You can look at Rome and you can look at Greece. You can look at Rome and you can look at Parthenon. It's something you can look at Israel and you can look at Jordan in 1963. So it seems like almost every time throughout human history, when there's a well-established power and a rising power that's vying for those same strategic resources, generally it ends in conflict and war. So our elites at this time in the early 2010s until 2015, when Trump came down the escalator, were basically thinking that China is the rising global power and there's nothing that you can do to stop them. And I would say that that's a horrible thing for America, for the poor people of America and the American middle class, because that automatically deflates our currency immensely, and we can't provide those same public benefits that the American consensus is practically saying that they overwhelmingly support.
It is, and it's always a battle of resources. And as long as we're operating under scarcity, whoever's rising and vying for those resources is ultimately always going to lead to some switch, some turn, because it's about protecting your nation and protecting your people. And that's what every nation out there is trying to do. And we as Americans should do everything that's in our best interest to help our people out. And that's great examples throughout human history of those conflicts arising. And we need to make sure we stay on top.
So that's the context. That's the backdrop. What was going on leading up to the war from our geopolitical adversaries. But what was the pro-America crowd doing during this time period? What they were doing was amazing. We had a bunch of oil pioneers from Texas, basically, that in the 2010s, at the same time, it's a known consensus that China is ascending to that top geopolitical spot. America is, at this time, I believe we were consuming 9 million barrels a day for our country, and we were able only to produce around 6 or 7 million. And everybody remembers really from 05 to 06, there was gas prices went up like crazy in the middle of the Iraq war. And that was because we did not have enough oil that we produced ourselves or that we could purchase to really meet our needs at a good price, especially because OPEC and Saudi Arabia always limit the amount of oil that they produce to ensure that they get a, what's considered fair globally and maximize their profits at the same time. They don't want to pump everything that they got too early and lose out on decades and decades of wealth, right? So this was all going on. And then some genius from Texas invented fracking. And once fracking was invented, and they're still making great technological innovations on it to this day as we speak. Right now, with the fracking technology we currently have, I heard recently on a podcast that we've only tapped 15% of what the United States has in potential. And that there's way more left over after every single drill with the fracking. So fast forward 2010 till recently, America has stepped up, especially during the Trump presidency, our ability to frack throughout the United States. We've opened more wells along the Gulf Coast, and then Trump takes over the Venezuela oil production and supply. That catapults us to one of the leading importers still, the largest exporter, and it leaves China as the largest importer. And they are reliant on 70%, 74% of their oil comes through the Strait of Hormuz. We are the largest exporter now. We have the largest oil. We are not dependent on that oil from the Arab countries anymore or the Strait of Hormuz due to domestic fracking and Venezuela. Yes, we still do purchase from the Gulf countries, but we do that more just to have an abundance of supply. The majority of those Gulf countries are pumping to Europe and Asia and Africa. So when the Iran war kicks off and the blockades, Trump's blockade goes through, and there's no passage throughout the state, the Strait of Hormuz, that means that 74% of China's oil is just halted. Their economy, which was already crippled during COVID, way worse than ours was, crippled even more. And their timeline to ascend past the United States now has been pushed back decades, and it might not happen at all now, especially when you look at artificial intelligence development and the oil or energy supply required to innovate and mass produce artificial intelligence across the nation. China has a point right now where it might take them, a century to reach us because of this head start due to our petrodollar and our oil supply that we have that they are lacking. We have basically in this war crippled China. We've crippled Russia. I can give you a ton of arguments why, but I think the China one is more interesting because they're our bigger adversary. And we have only enhanced America's position for the majority of our middle class and poor. And that story is not getting told.
No, man. Huge wins. I hope that this podcast will get that information out. You did a great job of breaking it down, the advantages. And it was all done in a matter of months. All of this was achieved in only a matter of months. And it puts us in such a strategic power, and not to mention national security, right? So if China advances and they become ahead of us, there increases the threat of any sort of action towards us. And I think that now that we have energy to innovate, it's not going to stifle us anymore. We're going to be able to advance all of these technologies that are going to strengthen the defense of our nation and protect us and give us a sense of peace. And I think that's something to take away as well.
Yeah, every single country that decides not to trade for crude oil and US dollars inflates the currency. Now, not every country will inflate it at the same rate, but a country like China, where we have offshored most of our manufacturing. So every single country that decides to not trade for crude oil and American dollars inflates our currency. Not all countries inflate it equally, however. A country like China, where we have offshored most of our manufacturing, where we buy much of our consumer goods, is going to inflate the currency by not trading in American dollars and in their own Chinese yuan instead at a much higher rate than a country like Eritrea.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Simply based off of the economy, right?
Right.
Based off of the strength and
just based off of scale alone.
Really, the only talking points you're hearing about this Iran war is just the nuclear threat and the physical threat. But everybody seems to be looking past these economic benefits that just strengthen us as a nation, help out the majority of Americans, which are the middle and lower class. And that point should be made more frequently. It was a short period of time. There wasn't a whole lot of tragedies. We lost, or a whole lot of casualties, rather. We lost more than that during the Beirut terrorist attack, right? Back in, I forget what year it was.
Yeah, I believe it was just over 250 Marines were killed in that.
250. Oh, hold on. Yes, I botched this whole thing. My numbers I was looking at the wrong numbers.
No, was it 250? I thought it was.
Yeah, it was just over 250, and then it was a orchestrated attack between that and the French base, and they lost about 58, I think, French airmen. But yeah, it was just over 250 American soldiers lost. But this is besides the point. The point is that this puts us in a position of strength. People should be on board, especially the middle class, especially the poor class, because we are getting the benefits that we're reaping from being in control of energy and exporting. We don't produce anything. What do we produce? Entertainment. That's probably our biggest source of production.
And munitions that we sell to all of our allies.
Right.
And sometimes we subsidize those sales, like we subsidize Saudi Arabia's sales, Qatar's, Israel's, many of those countries, but that really props up, industries that employ hundreds of thousands of people across the United States.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well,
do you want to go into the Karmelo Anthony stuff before it gets too old? I'm down to go on that today.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I wanted to focus mostly on the legal aspect of that. Karmelo Anthony, of course, this is a story that is causing all sorts of controversy. But essentially, this Karmelo Anthony, they were at was it a track meet or a football game?
It was a track meet.
A track meet. and they had a rain delay or something, right? So they retreated back to their team tents. And the Carmelo Anthony was in there. He's not a member of the school that was in the tents, and there was an altercation between them, led to Carmelo Anthony stabbing a 17-year-old football star, right? He must have been a multi-sport athlete. He just got sentenced, right? And of course, people are calling the sentencing unfair. They're arguing that there should have been manslaughter charges rather than murder. Now, you're a lawyer.
We're lawyers.
Tell me what the difference between manslaughter and murder is in the eyes of the law.
Well, this is not legal advice. This is purely from an academic perspective. But the difference between murder and manslaughter in many jurisdictions is that murder is either premeditated or deliberate, whereas manslaughter is not. Manslaughter is always when a homicide occurs, but the charge is mitigated down. It could be mitigated for negligence. Sometimes in some jurisdictions, heat of passion. In that common law, there was, mutual combat would be mitigated down to manslaughter, or, witnessing a spouse and committing adultery would be mitigated down to manslaughter. We see that like vehicular manslaughter, if someone gets an OUI and kills somebody, the difference between manslaughter and murder in the first degree or second degree is that there is intent to murder.
Right.
And in a manslaughter charge, there is no intent to murder. It's just someone was killed.
Okay, so under manslaughter, it sounded like that there could be instances where emotion trumps reason.
Reason will prevail.
And this is a reason for manslaughter. Is there any argument to be made that the escalation of the situation led him to act off emotion rather than reason, and this is justifiable under manslaughter?
Generally, when you see an altercation between two people, this has happened a lot, and there's lots of court cases about this. There will be a person, he gets into a fight with another person, punches him one time, the guy gets knocked unconscious, hits his head on the pavement, and goes into a coma and never wakes up, ends up dying. Generally, such a situation would be charged as manslaughter as opposed to murder, because the intent was to assault. The intent was just to punch somebody, maybe beat them up. Yes, it's illegal. Yes, it's a crime, but the intent to kill was never there. I would say when there's a weapon involved, especially a knife that is plunged into the heart of another person, and there was no physical altercation, there was no punches thrown, there was no valid self-defense claims, it's unlikely to see a manslaughter charge be brought in such a situation as that.
Right, yeah. And of course, there was shit talking back and forth. And at the end of the day, bro, it seemed to me that this is just somebody who is out looking for fight. I know I used to be one of these people. Any reason to get in an altercation, I've hopefully grown since then. I don't do that anymore. But it seemed to me that Carmelo Anthony was looking for a confrontation, carrying a knife to a school sporting event. I can't think of any reason why that makes any sense at all. And he didn't. He escalated it straight into stabbing the kid in the heart and taking his life. And there's been all sorts of despicable pushback. There's trends on social media of AI generated images of them pissing on his grave, and just outrage from the Black community because he was charged unjustly, is what they believe. But it doesn't seem to be, according to the testimonies, any sort of escalation of force or assault that he was defending himself from. He was simply just trying to force him out of their designated area, which seems reasonable enough to me.
Yeah, I mean, witness testimony is clear. There was no punches thrown. And so it's hard to make any valid self-defense claim if there was no punches thrown, there was no choking that occurred, there was no, I guess, physical threat to really launch a valid self-defense claim. One thing about the case that I felt like was very interesting is that in my research, a lot of people who claim self-defense end up testifying on their own behalf, especially if the victim is deceased. Because how else do you get your message across for a valid self-defense claim? You know, the injuries that you sustained prior, the emotions and fear that you felt during, and then your actions and what occurred just there afterwards. However, it seems like the strategy of the defense counsel in this case was to rely on witnesses to speak towards that self-defense claim instead of the defendant themselves. And it seems as if through witness testimony, the testimony didn't really advance that position. I'm sure the way that defense counsel would have liked.
So does that mean that during the trial, Karmelo Anthony wasn't placed up there to be examined on the self-defense case? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, right. So criminal defendants never have to testify against themselves for any criminal case. Now, it's not like this in civil law. In civil law, defendants do have to testify.
Okay.
However, in criminal law, they don't. They have their Fifth Amendment. Right. They don't have to incriminate themselves. They don't have to say anything. And that doesn't mean that they're guilty if they choose not to testify, right? That is their constitutional right. That is the bedrock, a foundational principle of our country. So it doesn't mean that they're guilty at all. And in many criminal cases, a defendant will not testify, and they shouldn't in most cases. However, in self-defense claims, it's normal for the defendant to testify because when you make a claim of self-defense, the burden of production for evidence and the burden of persuasion shifts from the state's responsibility to the defendant's responsibility. So in this case, for Karmelo Anthony to decide not to testify on his own behalf and to remain silent, I saw as a little bit unusual given the circumstance.
Yeah, it seems to me that you would want to be the voice of your defense. It is weird that you wouldn't want to go make your case for why it was self-defense, unless it would incriminate you. My guess, and I'm speculating, this is my opinion, nobody else's, but any good prosecutor would find a way to get the truth out, to get him to expose the intent behind what was really happening, which I believe was a gentleman overreacting out there looking for a fight. Perhaps he didn't understand the consequences of his action in the moment, but his intent was to stab him, bare minimum, right? And he hit him. Just because you miss the heart or hit the heart doesn't change the fact you hit the heart. You intentionally stabbed a man into his heart and killed him. And to me, that is reason enough to be put behind bars. In America, there is a real lack of self-control over emotions. And you see it at all these different protests that are going on where people are unable to contain themselves just in having dialogue. They're unable to control those emotions, and that is dangerous for the rest of us in society who are in control of our emotions and shouldn't be afraid in our own communities of being stabbed at a school event is crazy to me.
Yeah, it's, in a lot of ways, our culture has moved in a direction, I'd say, starting with the snowplow parent generation of like the mid 2000s, I call them the snowplow parents because they're basically always running in front of their kids and making sure the path is smooth for them. And what that's done is, and it's really infantilized the American populace in a lot of ways. And not being able to control your emotions, not having impulse control is complete childlike behavior. And I know you've heard it a ton over the last, our life, where they say, let the kids be kids, let them have a childhood. I think in 2012, during the Obama administration, they said, let's keep your kids on their health insurance until they're like 26 or something. And now it's normal for kids to live with their parents until they're in their 30s. We've completely infantilized the American populace, and now we're wondering why people are acting like children with no impulse control.
You're absolutely right, bro. And they kind of predicted it. It really all started with the everybody gets a trophy movement.
Yes.
Right? And this was like the real inauguration of, and I've never heard that before, but the snowplow parents, that's exactly what it is. And it comes from a place, a good place, right? Like we're fathers, we want our children to be safe and protected, but you don't do that by making sure that they don't know how to think and react and do things on their own. And by giving everybody a trophy and by trying to protect them from everything, you're doing a disadvantage because they're not able to grow up and learn those lessons that are defense mechanisms ingrained into us for thousands and thousands of years. It's important that we learn those opportunities to keep us safe, and we become better decision makers. And I know we've talked about this before.
We have this weird conundrum where people, I think, misunderstand what the goal of parenting and raising a child is for, right? The goal should not be to keep little Timmy a child forever until you die. The goal should be raising little Timmy to become Tim, a man that sacrifices, that innovates, that provides and safeguards his family and community and passes those on to the next generation. The goal of child rearing should be to prepare them for adulthoods, not to keep them childlike forever. That sounds like Peter Pan syndrome that in a lot of ways is toxic femininity.
Toxic femininity.
Okay, don't hurt yourself.
Yes, toxic femininity is exactly what it is. And we talked about this before on the last episode, but it is just so important, especially for young men, to get out and go out on an adventure, right? And go learn who they are. And we talked about needing some sort of sacrifice or servitude in this process to gain some sort of appreciation of things and your nation and all this. And it's really being mitigated and prevented by parents. They just want to keep them in the basement and feed them. I can't imagine, like, do most people even know how to cook? Most kids, I can't imagine they even know how to cook, or would they even be able to survive on their own out in the real world? It's a frightening thing, but it's happening in real time. And we need to shift back. We're going to say it over and over again. Shift back to 80s America when we were doing things right. We need to let kids go out and defend themselves. But also, it is hard to do when we have these situations like Carmelo Anthony and Austin Metcalf, where our communities are becoming less and less safe due to gang violence and all sorts of other factors. So while we're trying to transition this belief system that we need to let kids grow and become adults, that's the purpose, we also need to figure out how to solve these crime problems like we're seeing in this case that we were discussing today. Crime is out of control. It seems like every other session in Congress, at least local, state level, we're seeing legislation that is lessening and lessening and lessening the penalties for committing crimes. And just like when we were kids, if you don't show any sort of consequence for an action, an extreme consequence that actually forces someone to learn a lesson, they will continue to push the boundaries past that and break the law. And that's what we're seeing with all this lack of accountability in our judicial system.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is because the academic institution has just been crumbling. It's lost its legitimacy. Academia, no matter what your major is, everyone goes through sociology freshman or sophomore year. You have to. Yep. And what are we taught? That crime is only a result of poverty. But I'm sorry, that's just not true. Yes, there are some impoverished neighborhoods that experience crime, but West Virginia is one of the poorest states per capita in the country, and their crime rate is nothing like Chicago. Many of the Orthodox neighborhoods across the country, the Orthodox Jewish communities, are very poor, and there is virtually no crime. Many of the Amish communities are poor. There's virtually no crime. Many of the LDS communities, although there are plenty that do extremely well, there's still a number that are impoverished, and we don't see any crime. So academia, through its leftist, communist, I guess, modeling and framing, has convinced America that poverty or that crime is only a result of poverty, and that people need to be rehabilitated instead of punished. I would argue that some people can be rehabilitated, but a greater percentage of people can't be. And some people are just inherently criminals. They refuse to conform to society. They refuse to take any accountability or be responsible or live up to their duty as a citizen and a family member of whoever their tribe is. And I would say that the restorative justice model does not work. And I would say that the punitive model is better. Especially when you look at overall safety of the community. It may not be better for that individual criminal, but I'm going to prioritize the safety of the community over the criminal.
Yeah, I mean, that's the only thing that makes sense to me. We have to protect our citizens. Period. End of story. And as long as people are committing crimes, they need to be held accountable. And a lot of times they just need to be removed in general from society. And I think Charlie Kirk said it the best. And it is all about fathers in the nuclear family. And we're seeing just increasing numbers of single mothers raising children. And this is helping lead to the feminization of America, which is allowing us to believe that criminals are just a product of environment or victim of circumstance, when in reality, you're giving them the opportunities. The data speaks for itself. Recidivism continues to grow, and it's the rehabilitation is not coming. Why? Because the majority are unable to be rehabilitated. And so the only way that you can force any sort of shift is to hold them accountable so that the punishment is so severe that people will think twice when they're out there in the middle of a confrontation and want to pull out a gun, or when they're about to send a text message to an underage child. If we increase the punishment and hold these people accountable, quit worrying about rehabilitating that poor person who committed atrocious violence and predatory behaviors on a innocent individual. Don't worry so much about the perpetrator. Let's focus on the victims, and let's hold these perpetrators accountable and protect our communities so that we can have our parks back, so that we can have our downtown areas back without needles and feces all over the sidewalks. This is part of the suicidal empathy that we've spoken about. And it really is damaging to Americans, and we need to shift our focus, or shift our understanding and perspective to we've looked through the eyes of the victim long enough. We've done that. They've made all sorts of movies redepicting the evil witch as the good guy, and it's just misunderstood. We've done enough of that, and it's making matters worse. We need to start again looking through the lens of the victims who are just trying to be productive members of society, and oftentimes are having their lives taken because we feel sorry for a criminal, or the one on the light rail where he's just found incapable of being able to stand trial. If he's incapable of being able to stand trial, he shouldn't be out in society, period. And if he's violent, he should be with the rest of the violent predators, regardless of whether he's in control of his faculties or not. I would argue that if you're not in control of your faculties, you're even more of a danger to your community and society than if you were. So we need to bring back harsher punishments, and we need these judges. We need strong judges in our court systems that aren't feeling sorry for the victim who just took the life of a 17-year-old child. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm in concurrence with you on that one. I think a more punitive model is totally the way to go. If for no other reason, it removes the perpetrator from the community for an extended period of time. I think the rehabilitation model works great for OUIs, for drug charges, addicts, certainly anyone on fentanyl. I'd much rather see them in a drug treatment facility than behind bars or an alcoholic. I think most Americans would agree with that. But when it comes to crimes of violence, theft, stuff like that, that's actually hurting victims, they got to go. They got to go away for a serious amount of time to let the community heal, to let the community rebuild.
Dude, that's a good point, man. We're seeing breakdowns in our community, and the homeless and the crime is a big factor in that. And we just want our communities back. We want to be safe again. We want our kids to be able to enjoy the same streets that we grew up on, without fear of violence, or being robbed or any sort of thing like that. And so, go back to the punitive system. That's what we need. We need to hold criminals responsible for their transgressions, because that's our duty to our people.
Yeah, unfortunately, we've just swung way too far to the left on this issue. And I think that a lot of the moderates would be totally comfortable with rehabilitation for certain crimes.
Sure,
But it's gone way too far out of control. And most of the focus is put through the eyes of the defendant, through the eyes of the criminal, and how they're being harmed, and how in actuality they're the real victim. And what a disservice that just, like you said earlier, it breaks down the community constantly. I can't tell you how many times I've read through my research where people will have like 5 domestic violences on their record that have not been prosecuted, or they've never served serious jail time for. And then one of those guys ends up murdering his wife. I mean, I can't tell you how many times that happens through research.
An unnecessary life that could have been protected if only we would just hold our criminals accountable. And that's exactly why we need to strengthen our legal system. And again, look through the eyes of the victims rather than the perpetrator. And I think that people have lost sight of that in the Karmelo Anthony trial. And of course, it's become a race thing, right? As it generally goes to.
The race issue that was brought out through the Karmelo Anthony trial, unfortunately, does seem to be real. And it does seem to be a giant divide that needs to be mended. It needs to be fixed if America is ever going to reach its greatest potential. I don't have the answers for that myself. I think it's really unfortunate and horrible that we're in this situation where there's so much distrust between the races. I saw that there was a poll when George Bush was president. It took place in 2003. And it said on there, 83% of Black people thought that America didn't have any race issues. And it was like over 90% of white people. You fast forward to today, it's actually like almost the exact opposite. We've gone backwards in the last 30 years. And that's a a divide that needs to be mended if we want to save our cities and the urban areas in our country. And unfortunately, I don't have the answers for that one. It's incredible.
I got the answers, bro. I got the answers. We need 80s American pride back. We need to first identify ourselves as Americans, baby. We are all one nation. We are the same people. We all have our struggles, and we need to come together as Americans. And then from there, we can make better policy decisions that benefit us as a community and mend that divide. It all starts with pride in your nation and understanding that our identity first is American, and all those other secondary characteristics are just things that make you interesting and an individual person. But unified together as Americans, we are all the same, and we want the same things for our nations. We want to be able to afford to live. We want our streets to be safe and a thriving economy, right? This is what we want. That is not left or right. This is American. And as soon as we can start identifying as Americans, rather than all these sub-identities, that's when we will start to heal the divide and be able to come to common ground.
Yeah, I'd like to share a couple interesting anecdotes. I'm not sure where to take these, but I was just thinking of, like, you played football growing up. That's incredibly diverse, racially diverse. There's hardly ever any racial issues on the football team.
Never.
Right? Yeah. You played hockey. I played hockey. Every hockey team has one black guy. There's never any
and an Asian.
Yeah, right. And they're normally pretty good. Never any racial issues. We go to the military. Never any racial issues that I witnessed my entire career through multiple deployments. Have you?
No. We were all just boys out there surviving and one another. We relied heavily on each other. Of course, there's always joking around with one another, but there was never any serious divide among cultures, identities, or races, or anything like that. We were all brothers, man. I consider every single person I served with my brother, and it's an honor to know any of them. And it's hella diverse in the military, right?
And then when you look at the UFC, incredibly diverse. I've never witnessed any racial issues in the UFC amongst fighters leading up to a fight or after a fight. Okay, so what do all those anecdotes have in common? They're all extremely masculine, testosterone-driven environment.
Let's go,
is
baby.
there a correlation between a high masculine environment and I guess a lack of racial strife? And then when you look at the areas where there's extreme racial division, they're usually in heavily democratic leftist areas. College campuses are the worst. I mean, what they were saying about Jews on college campuses since October 7th is shameful. And, I can't believe it. What I hear said about white people on college campuses is despicable, and I can't believe it. And what you see, I guess, just in these kind of like feminized leftist spheres, is there a correlation there? I don't know, but it just came to my mind.
Yeah, dude. Oh, you got my wheels turning now. Yeah, of course there's a correlation, because what is a feminine trait? Empathy, right? Super feminine trait. And that the Democrats have been feeding and preying on the women voter for some time now based off of their empathy. Every single one of their policies is tied towards empathy. Now enter into the critical race theory and all this stuff that they've introduced into the public education system. You're feminizing the people, and I would argue that they're feminizing us through decreasing our testosterone levels through our diet. Most people are eating a terrible diet, and this is lowering their testosterone, so they're displaying more feminized traits like empathy. And so they feed on this empathy, and so these people have been convinced that there's all this injustice happening, and that leads to looking through the what they call looking through the lens of the oppressive lens, and this ultimately always leads to racial divide. And I think that the lack of masculinity and testosterone, like we all see each other as men, right? And we have disagreements. And I don't know about you, but every fight I've ever been in, with one exception, there was an altercation for whatever, usually over some sports thing or something stupid. And there would be an altercation, fisticuffs would be thrown, and then afterwards we're going out and having a beer together or getting together.
Yes.
Why? Because we just see men and their character. We're not obsessed with their physical traits. I believe that men look more towards character than they do physical traits. You see that in the dating world. Women are more obsessed with the more masculine traits, I would like to point out, too. Feminism, bro, 100% is leading towards this racial chaos, preying on that empathy, man. I think you make a good point. Never thought about this, but once you bring it up, like, that makes perfect sense to me. Of course, they're going to be appealing more to the oppressor lens because they've been feminized and they're being fed this agenda as they grow through public education.
Yeah. It's interesting. It seems like the more masculine the environment, the more accepting of racial differences occur. And you even see this there's not lots of historical examples of multicultural societies. I think you can look at Rome as being a good one, where it worked. You think about Rome, it started out with just Italians, and then you know they took over the Middle East. Now you got a ton of Jews and you know, that was a massive population in ancient Israel at the time. And then they take over Egypt and North Africa and Ethiopia. So it really did become and you know, Britain, parts of Germany, Austria, you know, France. That was a true multicultural society that lasted the longest in human history. And I think the only reason that worked was because it was an extremely masculine society. When you look at Yugoslavia, before it fell, I forget the dictator's name, but he kept that country together. Also an extremely masculine society at the time. Maybe that's the only way it really works. I don't know. I'm just shooting from the hip.
Listen, I'm pro patriarchy, pro masculinity. I believe gender roles exist and they serve a function and purpose. In my eyes, God doesn't make mistakes, and we all have these inherent traits for a reason. And of course, we got people trying to throw off that entire system that's worked for centuries and millennia, probably. It'll lead to the destruction of our nation, if especially, like, we're already seeing it. We talked about immigration before, like this empathy. You just keep opening the doors, let people take advantage of your good nature. You're gonna get exploited. You're gonna end up collapsing. We need masculinity back. Masculinity is more tied to logical rationale, and when we start using logic to analyze situations, we're better able to make decisions that are more beneficial for our nation and the people within it. So pro patriarchy, pro-masculine society. I'm using toxic femininity now. I hadn't heard that one before, but really that's what's happened to America. Yeah, man, we got a lot of problems, but here at Crossfire Republic, we're here to solve these problems, bridge the gap, bring America back, make Americans Americans again, rather than these other identities. So don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe. Show us your support. We want to keep making this content, talking about these issues. Anything else you wanted to go into today?
No, I can't think of anything else. We hit on a lot. I know before we do these shows, we always come up with a pre-game plan and we do all of our research. But it seems like this news cycle is moving so fast. We come up with the topic and then like 10 things have happened by the time we do the episode.
It is, bro. We got to be quicker. We got to be like when Wolf Cola was selling sodas to Boko Haram.
Wakurna Hua, Wolf Cola. Wakurna Hua, Wolf Cola.
All right.
Yeah.
We need to be on that news cycle, 24-hour news cycle.
Now listen, we live in the age of the 24-hour news cycle, which means we only have 24 hours to respond to this, okay? If we don't, then internet trolls are going to control the narrative.
But it's hard to keep up with all this stuff. And of course, we're planning future episodes and stuff. So it's hard to keep up with it. But you do a brilliant job you carried it this time. Tremendous work, dude. Great research and good information. I think it's important that we all keep in mind the implications of the implications.
Because of the implication.
Right? We're out on a boat. Anything can happen. We need to think of the benefits to our nation and what this Iran war did. And whether you're left or right, as an American, you should appreciate what this administration did to put us in a position of advantage and take care of the people of this nation. I think that's the biggest takeaway.
I agree. Well, great talking to you, Cujo.
Always a pleasure, Casey. We'll see you at the next one, brother.
All right. Peace out.
Later.